On our fifth wedding anniversary, my husband Walter admitted his secretary Brenda was 7 months pregnant. "It's not my fault you can't have kids," he said. That night, I quietly packed my things. The next morning, when he found the signed divorce papers. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. For 5 years, my husband, Walter, and I had been trying for a child. It was the one missing piece in our otherwise perfect-looking life. We'd met in college, dated for 3 years, and been married for 5. 8 years together. He was the charismatic student council president, and I was the organized head of the etiquette department. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, the ones who would make it, and for the longest time, I believed it, too. He was kind, he was devoted, and he seemed to love children so deeply. I remember watching him with his little nephew, how he'd get down on the floor and make silly faces, and my heart would just melt. That was the man I wanted to build a family with. Every month that passed without good news was a small, private heartbreak. The hope, the waiting, then the quiet disappointment that I would hide from everyone but him. In the beginning, Walter was my rock. I remember one particularly bad Tuesday, after another negative test, I just sat on the bathroom floor and cried. He came in, didn't say a word, just sat down on the cold towel behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and held me until the shaking stopped. He whispered into my hair, "Carol, don't worry. Good things take time. Our little one is probably just waiting for the perfect moment to surprise us." And I'd believe him. I'd lean back into his strength and think, we can get through this, as long as we have each other. But over the last 2 years, something had changed. The pressure from his parents started building. It was subtle at first. At Sunday dinners, his mother would pat my hand and say things like, "Don't you worry, dear. It will happen when God wills it," but her eyes held a look of pity that made my skin crawl. Then came the more pointed remarks about friends' grandchildren, about the legacy of the family name. It was a constant, low hum of expectation in the background of our lives. And Walter, he began to shift. He started absorbing their anxiety, their disappointment. It began with subtle comments, little remarks after a friend's baby announcement, like, "Must be nice," with a sigh that was clearly directed at me. At first, they seemed innocent, but they slowly became more pointed, like little paper cuts that sting more than you'd expect. Then came the day he dropped the bomb. It was a Thursday. He'd come home from work, not even taking his coat off, and announced that he had scheduled an appointment for me with a renowned gynecologist in the city. He didn't ask me. He told me. He had the appointment card in his hand. He wanted me to get tested, he said, his voice flat and businesslike, to find out if something was wrong with me. I was stunned. It felt like he'd slapped me. All the patience, all the shared hope we once had, seemed to vanish in that one clinical, dismissive statement. For the first time in our 8 years together, I truly lost my temper. The anger was a hot, surging wave. My voice shook, but I stood my ground. "Walter," I said, my hands clenched at my sides. "You did what? You made an appointment about my body without even speaking to me?" "I'm trying to solve a problem, Carol," he said, as if I were a difficult employee and not his wife. "No," I shot back, my voice rising. "If anyone should be getting tested first, it should be you. It's a much simpler process for men than it is for women. It's the fairest approach, and the least painful for both of us. If your results come back normal, then I will go. I will do every invasive test they ask of me. But you go first." As the words left my mouth, his expression darkened. The kind, understanding man I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger with narrowed, indignant eyes. His voice rose, laced with an anger I'd never heard before. "How could I possibly have a problem? Don't be ridiculous. It's been 5 years, Carol. Are you really not going to consider our future? All I'm asking is for you to get tested. If there's an issue, we can find other ways. Don't you want a baby that belongs to us? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He had twisted it, turned it all around to make me the villain, the one standing in the way of our happiness. As if he had been the only one trying, the only one sacrificing. For a moment, I couldn't recognize the man standing before me. He was cold, calculating, and cruel in a way that chilled me to the bone. I took a deep breath, fighting to regain my composure. If you're willing to take the test, I said, my voice firm now, then I will, too. But I refused to accept this one-sided suspicion. His face fell. The fight went out of him, his shoulders slumping as if my words had crushed him. He just shook his head and walked away. The warmth that once lived in his eyes was gone, replaced by an unsettling coldness that seemed to settle deep into the foundation of our home. That was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. After that fight, a quiet chill settled over our marriage. It wasn't a loud, angry silence, it was a dead, empty silence, the kind that swallows all the air in a room. Walter started going on business trips more frequently. Before, he'd tell me all the details, the flight numbers, the hotel, the agenda. Now, it was just, I have to go to the coast for a few days, or something came up in the southern branch. They were longer, more vague. When he was home, he was a ghost. He was physically present, but his mind, his spirit, was a million miles away. I tried, in the beginning, to bridge the gap. I'd make his favorite meal, and he'd eat it while scrolling through emails on his phone, barely tasting it. I'd sit next to him on the sofa in the evening, wanting to lean my head on his shoulder like I used to, but there was a stiffness in him, an invisible wall I couldn't get past. He was there, but he was gone. I remember one night, I had a huge success at the jewelry firm where I was a lead designer. We landed a major contract, and it was my design that sealed the deal. I was buzzing with excitement. I came home with a bottle of champagne, thinking maybe, just maybe, this could be a spark. He was on his laptop at the dining table. I told him the good news, my voice full of pride. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. "That's nice, honey," he mumbled. The champagne stayed in the fridge, unopened. We were no longer partners, we were just two people sharing a mortgage, bound by a piece of paper. The mutual respect we once had felt like a distant memory. I kept making excuses for him. I told myself it was just a phase, that the pressure of his work was getting to him, that he was just as disappointed as I was about our struggles with infertility, and this was just how he was handling it. I foolishly believed it would pass. I told myself that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried under all this stress. That was my mistake. One evening, he came home from another one of his week-long trips. He walked in, dropped his suitcase by the door, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book. And that's when I saw it. For the first time in 5 years of marriage, I noticed something that made my heart stop cold. A simple detail that screamed volumes. His wedding ring was gone. It wasn't just any ring. It was the ring I had designed myself. From the first sketch on a napkin during a rainy Sunday afternoon to the final, polished piece, I had poured over 30 nights of my life into that ring. Every line, every curve, every facet was meticulously planned, as if I were crafting the very foundation of our future together. In my professional world, I was known for my skill and precision, but designing my own wedding ring, I felt like a nervous apprentice. What if I made a mistake? What if it wasn't perfect? Walter had been there through the entire process. He wasn't a creative person, but he was a supportive one. Night after night, he'd sit beside me at my work table, bringing me cups of tea, rubbing the tension from my shoulders. He knew nothing about jewelry design, but he listened attentively as I explained why I chose that specific cut for the diamond, why I favored the warmth of platinum, and the meaning I had woven into every intricate detail. He understood how much love and hope I had poured into that little circle of metal. He understood it was a symbol of everything we dreamed of for our life together. He once held the finished piece in his palm and said, "It's perfect, Carol. It's us." And now, his finger was bare. I suppressed the ache that began to swell in my chest, forcing my voice to sound casual, light. "Where's your ring?" Walter glanced at his bare left hand as if noticing it for the first time. There wasn't a flicker of panic, not a hint of distress. His face remained calm, completely unaffected. After a beat, he chuckled softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh. I took it off when I went swimming last time and forgot to put it back on." I just stared at him. The words, so casual, so nonchalant, were a physical blow. The emptiness in my chest deepened, spreading like a cold wave through my entire body. I could no longer convince myself this was just a phase. Walter, more than anyone, was a man of details. He was the kind of man who noticed if a picture frame was crooked by a single degree. He noticed everything. If he could forget something as significant as his wedding ring, it meant he had stopped caring about everything that ring represented. It was a promise. And now that promise felt fragile, almost non-existent. I knew I had to talk to him, to understand what had gone so terribly wrong. That night, I had planned to tell him my own news. It was big news, something I was incredibly proud of, a beacon of light in the growing darkness of my life. A diamond ring I had designed, a piece I'd poured my soul into after he started pulling away, had become our company's best-selling piece of the season. It was a huge success, a major career milestone that came with a significant promotion and a salary increase. I thought, maybe, just maybe, this good news could be a spark for us. Maybe it could remind him of the woman he married, the partner he used to celebrate with, the team we used to be. I rehearsed the words in my head, hoping to see a flicker of the old Walter, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. But before I could gather the courage to speak, before I could even bring up the conversation about the ring or my promotion, he spoke first. The room was quiet, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. He was sitting in his armchair, staring at nothing, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. "Carol," he said, his voice heavy, serious, but completely devoid of emotion. "I need to tell you something." My heart skipped a beat. My breath caught in my throat. I had a feeling, a cold, sickening feeling that was crawling up my spine, that my life was about to change forever. The words that followed felt like a blade slicing through the still, quiet air of our living room. "Brenda, my secretary, she's pregnant." The room started to spin. The pattern on the rug seemed to warp and twist. I grabbed the arm of the sofa to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. He wasn't done. He delivered the next blow with the same flat, dead tone. 7 months now. 7 months. My mind raced, the calculations spinning like a whirlwind. 7 months ago, that was right after our argument about having children. That was when the business trips started. That was when he stopped touching me. That was when he stopped wearing his ring. The signs had been there all along, like bright red warning flags that I had been too hopeful, too foolish, to see. His apology came next, soft and hollow, words that meant nothing. "Carol, I'm sorry. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking. It was just that one time. I swear. I've never even traveled alone with her since." His voice felt so distant, like it was coming from the other end of a long tunnel. His words bounced off the walls of my mind, but they didn't ease the pain, they amplified it with their dishonesty. My hands began to shake as I reached for my glass of water on the coffee table. The trembling was so intense that I didn't even realize I had let it slip from my grasp until it crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces on the hardwood. Each shard was a reflection of the brokenness I felt inside. As those fragments scattered, so did the last remnants of my breath. My throat tightened, my lungs felt like they were being squeezed by an invisible hand. The weight of his confession pressed down on me like a heavy, suffocating fog. 7 months pregnant. That meant the due date was only 2 or 3 months away. For Brenda, an employee at his company, this wasn't something he had just recently discovered. He had known all along. He had watched her belly grow for months, had likely talked to her about it, planned for it, all while coming home to me, sleeping in our bed, and letting me believe our only problem was a quiet sadness. And by not taking any action, he had silently allowed this child to grow, allowing the pregnancy to progress without a single thought for how it would devastate me. He broke the silence again, his voice cracking with a performance of sincerity that made my stomach turn. Brenda tried to terminate the pregnancy last month. She and I both wanted to correct our mistake, but it didn't work. The doctor said it was too risky. Her body has been weak ever since. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, as if he were looking for some kind of absolution, as if his pathetic, likely fictional, attempt to fix his mistake would somehow redeem him in my eyes. A failed abortion. What a pathetic, disgusting lie. It was just another calculated move, another attempt to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, to show that he had tried to make amends after his infidelity. The truth was, the baby was here to stay, and now he had no choice but to face the consequences. But did he really think I was so utterly devoid of self-respect that I would just accept this? That I could forgive him for everything and just move on? I forced myself to stay calm, to push the screaming, raging emotions down and keep control. I wouldn't let him see the turmoil inside me. I wouldn't let him see how much he was destroying me. My grandmother used to say, "Never let them see you bleed." Right then, I understood what she meant. "So, Walter," I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the heartbreak that churned within me. "What exactly do you plan to do?" When he saw that I wasn't screaming or crying, he seemed to relax, a flicker of relief crossing his face. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He actually thought I was coming around to his reasoning. After a moment of contemplation, he did the most audacious thing. He moved from his chair, knelt in front of me on the sofa, and grabbed my hand. His grip was eager, and he smiled. Smiled! As if he were offering me some kind of grand prize. "Once she gives birth," he said, his voice full of a disgusting, hopeful certainty, "we can raise the child as our own. We'll give her a sum of money, a generous one, and make sure she signs a non-disclosure agreement. We'll send her far away from the city. This way," he said, squeezing my hand, his eyes shining with his twisted logic, "you won't have to suffer anymore from not having a child. It's the perfect solution. Doesn't that sound good?" At that moment, I could feel my nails digging into my palms. The sharp sting of pain was the only thing that kept me from laughing out loud, a hysterical, broken sound, at the sheer absurdity of it all. It was almost too much to bear. He expected me to be grateful. He expected me to accept the child he had conceived in betrayal, the living, breathing symbol of his infidelity, and he had the audacity to tell me it was all for my own good, to spare me from suffering. "Walter, when you wear a mask for too long, taking it off will tear your skin. Seeing you in this pathetic state now, it's nothing short of disgusting. There was no way in hell I would ever accept this. There was no forgiveness in my heart. Not for this. Not for him." He was trying to spin it all as an unfortunate accident, a drunken mistake, an unexpected pregnancy, just to protect his carefully crafted image of the good husband. How thoughtful of him. I didn't answer his question directly. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath. I wiped away a single tear that had escaped the corner of my eye. Then I looked up at him, my expression serene, almost gentle. I needed him to believe I was broken but pliable. "Then make sure you properly compensate Brenda for everything she's been through," I whispered softly. "She's the mother of our child, after all." Walter froze, his expression faltering for just a second. But then, seeing my controlled, submissive demeanor, his tense features finally relaxed. And he smiled, a rehearsed, triumphant smile. He stood up and pulled me into an embrace that felt cold and foreign. "Carol," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "Don't overthink this. That baby is ours. Thank you for supporting my decision. I leaned into him, my voice quiet, almost too agreeable. Of course. But inside, everything was shifting. My heart felt like it was sinking into something deeper, something colder. I wasn't just supporting his decision. I was quietly plotting my own. A few days later, I arranged a full medical examination for myself. I didn't tell Walter. I didn't tell anyone. This was for me. I needed answers, not opinions. I went to a clinic on the other side of town, a place I knew none of our friends or acquaintances would ever go to. I paid in cash and used my maiden name for the initial check-in. I remember sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by happy, expectant couples holding hands and flipping through baby magazines. I felt completely invisible, a ghost in a room full of life. I just sat there, reading an article about patio furniture from 3 years ago, trying to breathe normally and not let the tears well up in my eyes. Every part of the process was a quiet humiliation, but I knew it was necessary. A week later, the results came in. I couldn't bear to go back to the clinic, so I asked the doctor to call me. I was parked in a grocery store parking lot, the engine off, the windows rolled up, the midday sun beating down on the car. The world outside was so normal, people pushing carts, kids laughing. My world was anything but. The doctor was clear, concise, and professional. He went through the results line by line. Every indicator was perfectly normal. My hormone levels were fine. My anatomy was fine. There was no sign of infertility, no issues with conception, nothing. He said, his voice kind but clinical, "Ma'am, from a medical standpoint, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to conceive." As I hung up the phone, a quiet, profound relief washed over me. It wasn't me. After 5 years of self-doubt, of feeling like my own body had failed me, of feeling broken, it wasn't me. The relief was quickly overshadowed by a heavy, cold realization. If I was fine, then the problem had to be him. And if the problem was him, this could only mean one thing. There was a very, very high chance that the child in Brenda's womb wasn't Walter's at all. I stared out at the bustling parking lot, the weight of it all sinking in. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of me believing the problem was my own body, 5 years of feeling like a failure. And all this time, he knew. Or at the very least, he suspected. That's why he fought so hard against getting tested himself. It was never about fairness, it was about hiding a secret. He had let me carry that burden, that shame, all by myself, to protect his own fragile ego. The irony was almost laughable. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. What were they supposed to be? Two perfectly matched opposites, destined to come together and create life on the very first try? It was a cruel, elaborate joke, and I had been the punchline. "Walter," I whispered to the empty car, my voice hard as steel, "if you want a child so badly that you'd betray our marriage, abandon every ounce of morality, and deceive everyone around you, then fine. I'll give you what you want. And I'll make sure you get exactly what you deserve." My plan began to form right there in that parking lot. It wasn't just about leaving him anymore. It was about taking back every piece of myself he had tried to break. It was about justice. And that started with our finances. The life we had built, the assets we had acquired, they were built on my support, my stability, my high-earning salary from the early years while he was getting his company off the ground. It was time for that to be rectified. That evening, I set the stage. I made his favorite dinner, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. I opened a bottle of the expensive red wine we'd been saving. When he came home, I played the part of the dutiful, wounded, but ultimately forgiving wife. I told him that while I was still deeply hurt, I had been thinking, and I was willing to try and make our unconventional family work. I could see the guilt in his eyes. It was real, but it wasn't guilt for cheating, it was the anxious guilt of a man who realized he might have miscalculated and was close to losing his comfortable life. With reddened eyes, he looked at me, his voice cracking as he pleaded, "Carol, I was wrong. I really was. If you can forgive me, I'll do anything to make it up to you. This was my opening. I looked at him calmly, my heart pounding with a cold, calculated rhythm, but my face a mask of fragile hope. Right now, I said, my voice steadied despite the storm inside, I feel incredibly insecure, Walter. Our whole future feels uncertain. But because I truly love you, because of the 8 years we've shared, I'm willing to trust you one more time. Walter, looking as though he had been given a second chance at life, swore to me with the utmost sincerity. Carol, I will never betray you again. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I nodded, as if reassured. Then, as though the thought had just crossed my mind, I looked at him with a measured expression. Walter, if you truly want to ease my worries and make me feel more secure, if you want to prove to me that you're committed to me, and not just to the situation, how about transferring our jointly owned fixed assets to my name? The words hung in the air. I saw his expression stiffen, a flicker of cold, hard calculation crossing his face. I didn't give him time to think. I pressed on, letting my voice waver with emotion. I genuinely want to continue our life together. That's why I'm only asking for this arrangement, just to give me some peace of mind. To know that no matter what happens, I am secure. If I truly wanted to leave you, I could just file for divorce instead. I wouldn't need to play these games. I know a good lawyer would ensure I get a very generous settlement, especially under the circumstances. But I don't want a divorce. I want my husband back. Then, I delivered the final, calculated blow. I let a single tear slip down my cheek, wiping it away quickly as if I were embarrassed. I will accept this child, I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. And I will raise them as my own. I'm willing to give you another chance. I just need to feel safe. Walter, who had initially hesitated, fell silent. I could see the war in his mind, the assets versus the perfect, easy solution he craved. But in the end, he chose to believe in the woman he had spent 8 years with, the woman who had always been obedient and reasonable. He believed I couldn't possibly turn the tables on him. Oh, how arrogant he was. He saw the assets as a small price to pay to keep me quiet and cooperative through the upcoming birth and transition. A week later, we were at the lawyer's office. The air was thick with unspoken words. Walter transferred all 15 properties we had acquired after our marriage into my name, along with the titles for our 7 luxury cars. The documents were officially notarized. He did it partly out of guilt, but mostly to keep me from leaving. He was afraid that if I left, the ensuing divorce would expose everything about Brenda and potentially threaten his position at the company. So, with this grand gesture, he tried to placate me, to keep me quiet until he could get what he really wanted, the baby. He thought he was still in control. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his destruction. A few days after the asset transfer was finalized, Brenda came looking for me. It was almost as if she had a sixth sense for when she was being cut out of the picture, or more likely, Walter had foolishly mentioned something to her. I knew this moment would come, so I had chosen a public place, a bright, busy cafe downtown where a scene would be unwelcome. When she showed up, I was deliberately slow in gathering my paperwork from the table, ensuring that the freshly notarized property deeds, with my name listed as the sole owner, were left in plain sight. I wanted her to see them. I wanted her to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. She sat down across from me, her belly prominent between us. Her expression was smug at first, but as soon as her eyes landed on the papers, her face tightened. "Walter gave you all the properties?" she asked, her voice a sharp, angry whisper. I smiled at her, a calm, almost amused expression on my face. "It's just some compensation for my emotional distress, that's all," I replied coolly, taking a sip of my latte. "Why are you here, Brenda?" She didn't answer right away. She absently ran her heavily bejeweled fingers over her round belly, a gesture that was meant to be a show of power, her ultimate trump card. Her gaze flickered toward me, trying to gauge my reaction. When she saw how unbothered I was, a look of pure disappointment crossed her face. She had come here expecting a fight, expecting tears, expecting to have the upper hand. She had none of it. I had the deeds to 15 properties sitting on the table. What did she have? Finally, she spoke, plastering a fake, sweet smile on her face. Carol, I came here today to apologize to you. I raised an eyebrow. Her apology felt as fake as her eyelashes. I've been pregnant with Walter's child for 7 months now, she said, her hand never stopping its deliberate, provocative caress of her belly. He already told me, I said, my voice smooth as glass. I took another calm sip of my coffee. Since you're 7 months along, you should focus on taking care of yourself. The stress can't be good for the baby. I let the silence stretch for a moment before adding, if it's a Robinson child, I'm sure Walter's parents will be very welcoming. They are very particular about their bloodline. I deliberately emphasized the words, a Robinson child, and lifted my gaze to watch her. For a split second, I saw it. A flicker of panic in her eyes. Her fingers tightened around her cup, her knuckles turning white. It was a fleeting moment, quickly masked by her usual composed exterior, but I saw it. She recovered quickly, her eyes lowering. Of course, it's Walter's child. What else would it be? She replied, her voice firm, but with a slight tremor of uncertainty underneath. I just nodded slowly, a small smile playing on my lips. I knew then, without a doubt, that she was hiding something. She had been so sure of her position, so certain that this baby was her golden ticket to a life of luxury. How unfortunate for her that her ticket might just be a fake. My plan was working better than I could have ever imagined. Not long after my meeting with Brenda, I got a message from my friend, Joyce. She had been a godsend through all of this. She worked at the headquarters of Walters Corporation. While he was the CEO of a subsidiary, Joyce had connections everywhere. She was smart, discreet, and fiercely loyal. Getting information wasn't difficult for her. I had asked her to do some discreet digging into Brenda's past, specifically around the time she would have gotten pregnant. Joyce and I met for lunch at a small Italian place she liked. She slid a thin folder across the table. You were right to be suspicious, she said quietly, her eyes full of a sad understanding. I talked to a few people in HR and accounting at the subsidiary. 8 months ago, Brenda had a boyfriend. A man named Russell Sullivan. He worked in construction, apparently. Multiple people saw him picking her up from work in his big Ford truck. They were very public. She continued, lowering her voice. Then, all of a sudden, they broke up. No one knows why for sure, but the timing is interesting. Not long after the breakup, Brenda resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. But the whispers started almost immediately. Rumors that she was pregnant. And naturally, everyone in the office assumed the child was Walter's. It was the juiciest gossip they'd had in years. Joyce hesitated, her expression full of concern. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Carol, why are you looking into this? What's going on? You can tell me. I didn't have to say anything. The look in my eyes, the strain on my face, told her everything she needed to know. A wife investigating her husband's pregnant former secretary, there was only one possible reason. Joyce just sighed, a sound heavy with sympathy, and squeezed my hand. If you need anything, she said softly, anything at all, just tell me. I'll do whatever I can to help you. If you need me to find this Russell guy, I can make some calls. Her kindness was a lifeline. I felt a lump form in my throat. I thought I had become numb, that I had walled off all my emotions to execute my plan. But her sincerity cut through the cold shell I had built around myself. Thank you, Joyce, I said, my voice softer than I expected. I do need your help with something. Can you find out more about this Russell? I need to know everything you can find. Where he lives, where he works, anything. Joyce didn't hesitate. For someone as socially adept as her, tracking down a person within the city's professional circles was just a matter of a few phone calls to a few well-placed friends. That evening, I was leaving a late product development meeting at my office when I started to feel unwell. The tension in my chest was unbearable, a constant, heavy weight. I told my team I was calling it a night and drove home, just wanting to fall into bed. As I stepped out of the elevator on my floor and walked toward my apartment, I was caught off guard by an unexpected sound. Voices. Raised voices, drifting from behind my front door. It was the unmistakable sound of a heated argument. And one of the voices was Brenda's. I stopped in my tracks, my hand hovering over the keypad of the smart lock. The hallway was silent except for the angry, muffled sounds coming from my home. I strained to hear through the door, and then I caught the first words, shrill with desperation. It was Brenda. You actually put all the properties under Carol's name? Walter, what do you think I am? What will I have left after marrying you? A salary? That's not what you promised. Inside, Walter was silent, but the tension was so thick I could feel it through the door. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at my lips. So, my little performance at the cafe had worked. Brenda had taken the bait and was now showing her true colors to Walter. Come on, Brenda, Walter's voice finally broke through, laced with frustration and exhaustion. It's just some houses. I have other assets. A healthy salary, stocks. We'll be fine. A loud crash suddenly echoed from inside, followed by the unmistakable sound of porcelain shattering against a wall. My heart skipped a beat. Then came Brenda's bitter, mocking laugh. We'll be fine? What do you think, Walter? I've been suffering through this pregnancy for 10 months and I get nothing? No security? While that woman does absolutely nothing and walks away with what should have been my future? You think I'm an idiot? I had to press my hand to my lips to keep from laughing. For someone I thought was a master manipulator, Brenda was surprisingly impatient. She still had leverage, the baby, but here she was, throwing it all away in a fit of childish rage, revealing her greed for all to see. The argument escalated, the words becoming more frantic, more desperate. Brenda's voice cracked as she began to cry, loud, theatrical sobs that filled the space between the walls. Then, through the noise, I heard something that made my eyebrows shoot up in surprise. I'll abort this baby right now, she shrieked, her voice trembling with raw, manipulative emotion. I swear, Walter, I'll make sure you never have children again. Oh, that was a line she should never have crossed. Because if there was one thing Walter valued above all else, it was having a child, his heir, the one thing he believed would cement his legacy. Just as I predicted, the air seemed to still. Everything went silent. And then, slap. A sharp, ugly slap rang through the room, so loud it seemed to echo in my chest. The unmistakable sound of a struggle followed, a chair scraping across the floor, a muffled cry. Then, just as abruptly, everything fell silent again. The stillness was suffocating, more frightening than the shouting had been. Enough, Brenda, Walter's voice was as cold as ice, a tone I had never heard from him before, full of menace. If you dare to get rid of this child, I will make sure your entire family suffers the consequences. Do you understand me? I could almost picture the expression on his face, those once gentle eyes now sharp and merciless. Brenda didn't utter another word. She knew, all too well, that he had the power to back up his threats. Standing there in the hallway, I quietly turned and walked back to the elevator. I had heard everything I needed to hear. Walter was finally seeing the real Brenda, and he was trapped. My plan was falling into place perfectly. After that day, something subtle shifted in Walter's behavior toward me. He started coming home on time. He avoided unnecessary business trips. He even started giving me small gifts again, a bouquet of flowers, a small piece of jewelry from a department store. They were empty gestures, but they were telling. He was trying to maintain an illusion of normalcy, to mend the bridges he had burned with me, and I played along, feigning cooperation and gratitude. I knew exactly what was happening. He had witnessed Brenda's instability and greed firsthand. He had seen the vicious, grasping woman behind the sweet, adoring secretary facade. And seeing me, in contrast, so calm, so understanding, so obedient, he was reconsidering his plan. His original idea of divorcing me and marrying Brenda was likely off the table. He was now probably planning to take the child, pay Brenda off with the smallest amount possible, and cut ties with her entirely. He hoped to keep me, his stable, wealthy, and now compliant wife, by his side to raise his son in a perfect home. But that wasn't the ending I wanted. Not even close. I didn't want to be his co-parent or his roommate. I wanted to be free. As Brenda's due date neared, I found myself encouraging Walter to visit her more often. "You should check on her," I'd say softly over dinner. "She's carrying our child. It's important for you to be there." It wasn't out of kindness. It was a calculated move. I wanted him to invest more of his emotions, more of his energy, into this baby. I wanted him to see the ultrasounds, to feel the baby kick, to start dreaming of a future with his son. I wanted to bind him to it, so that when everything eventually fell apart, his disappointment would be that much more crushing. At 39 weeks, Brenda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. I arrived at the hospital later that day. I could hear Walter's parents' joyful chatter from down the hallway. Their excitement spilled out into the corridor where I stood alone, leaning against the cold wall, my face a calm, unreadable mask. They had known. From the start, they had all conspired together, turning a blind eye to the betrayal, happy to trade their daughter-in-law of 8 years for a grandson. I knocked on the door and stepped inside, placing the freshly made soup I'd brought on the table. The room fell silent. Just as I was about to make a polite exit, Brenda's voice, sickly sweet, stopped me. "Mom, Dad," she said with a deliberately obedient smile to Walter's parents, "could you step out for a moment? I have something to discuss with Carol." As soon as the door clicked shut, her gentle demeanor vanished. Her gaze sharpened into a cold, triumphant glare. "Carol, you've already lost," she sneered, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Mom and Dad just told me they're ready to have Walter file for divorce. Did you really think he was going to take the child and raise it as yours? That was just a temporary excuse to pacify you. Now that the baby is safely born, you're no longer needed. Enjoy your last days as Mrs. Robinson." Her taunts barely stirred any emotion in me. I didn't bother arguing. Instead, my gaze shifted to the baby in her arms. His skin was noticeably darker than I'd expected, a beautiful olive tone, but almost unnaturally so compared to his supposed parents. Walter had always been fair-skinned, prone to sunburn, and Brenda, before her pregnancy, had been pale and delicate. This baby, if he got any darker, he might as well be from an entirely different lineage. I arched an eyebrow slightly, then smirked. "Oh, Brenda, I hope you're not getting ahead of yourself. Brag all you want after you actually set foot in the Robinson household. A lot can happen between now and then. For all you know, you're just working hard to prepare my victory gown for me." My words struck a nerve. Her eyes filled with hatred. And then she did something monstrous, something that confirmed every dark thought I'd had about her. Her fingers suddenly tightened around the baby's tiny arm. A sharp, cruel pinch. In an instant, angry red marks bloomed on the delicate skin, and the baby's cries, sharp and pained, filled the entire hospital room. Right on cue, Walter's parents burst back in, panic on their faces. Before I could even process what had happened, Brenda's voice rang out, dripping with accusation. "Mom, Dad, you have to stand up for us." Carol wanted to see the baby, but the moment I looked away, she pinched him. "Look, his arm is all swollen." They rushed past me, and the moment they saw the red marks, Walter's mother's expression darkened into a mask of cold fury. The warmth she once had for me was completely gone. "Carol," she said, her voice low and measured, "you've seen it yourself all these years. You still haven't been able to bear a child. We like you, but we cannot ignore certain pressures. Now that Brenda has given birth to Walter's son, we want to offer you some compensation. A clean break is best for everyone. Even if you divorce Walter, we will always be family. The tension in my heart finally eased. It was over. I let out a soft chuckle. I lifted the bowl of soup I had just poured and downed it in one go. "Mom," I said, setting the empty bowl down with a loud click, "this soup, you taught me how to make it 4 years ago. This will be the last time I call you that. There's no need to talk about family anymore. Goodbye." I walked out, leaving them all standing there with their precious, illegitimate heir. 1 week later, sooner than I had expected, Walter came to me with the divorce papers. He showed up at the apartment in the evening, looking utterly exhausted. His usually well-groomed hair was unkempt, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and dark circles hung beneath his eyes. He clutched the legal documents tightly in his hand, his expression a mixture of conflict and pain. "Carol, I'm sorry," he mumbled, not looking me in the eye. He sank into a chair at the dining table. "I swear I never wanted to divorce you, but I had no choice. Brenda is threatening me with the baby every single day. She says if we don't divorce, she'll go to the press, she'll jump off a building with him. My parents are siding with her, they're pressuring me endlessly. I had no other option." He slowly pushed the divorce agreement toward me across the smooth wood of the table. I sat down opposite him and picked it up. My hands were steady. I lowered my gaze, focusing on the asset division section. Since all the property was already in my name, there was no dispute there. As for his liquid assets, savings, stocks, and other investments, he had written an 80-20 split. 80% to me. That genuinely surprised me. I had already consulted a divorce lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davis, who told me that in cases where one spouse is clearly at fault, I could expect to fight for maybe 60 or 70% of the marital assets. A long, drawn-out custody battle over the finances. This generous offer saved me a lot of trouble and legal fees. He was trying to buy my silence, my quick and quiet disappearance from his life so he could start his new, perfect family. Just as I picked up the pen to sign, he suddenly reached across the table and grabbed my hand. His eyes glistened with unshed, pathetic tears. "Carol, I know you've suffered. I am so sorry for how this has all turned out. Don't worry, I will transfer everything to your name immediately. And in the future." He paused, his voice cracking, "If you don't have children of your own, you can treat our son as yours. You can be his aunt. He'll need a woman like you in his life." A wave of pure disgust surged through me. I withdrew my hand from his grasp as if I'd been burned, my expression cold and indifferent. "There's no need for that, Mr. Robinson. From now on, take care of yourself." With that, I clicked the pen and signed my name with a firm, steady hand on the line. I pushed his copy back across the table, picked up my own, and walked away without looking back. He had no idea that if I ever wanted a child, I would have one of my own. But as for him, that was no longer an option. The sound of the front door closing behind me was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've given me a like, and I'll understand that you've been with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please comment the number 1 and listen as I continue my story. Over the next 2 weeks, my life became a whirlwind of calculated moves. I was free, and I was wealthy, but my plan wasn't complete. I contacted a top-tier broker and, following the advice of my financial advisor, sold off all the company shares Walter had allocated to me. The market was high, the company's reputation was still intact, and the timing was perfect. The profits were significant. As I stared at my new bank account balance, a number with more zeros than I'd ever seen, I couldn't suppress a satisfied smile. This wasn't an inheritance, this was retribution. Then, I received a message from Joyce. She had found him. Russell Sullivan, Brenda's ex-boyfriend. She had his work address and his phone number. The final piece of the puzzle was in my hand. When I finally met Russell, I didn't bother with pleasantries. We met at a quiet, no-frills diner on the industrial side of town. His appearance was rugged and unrefined, his hands calloused from hard work, a far cry from Walter's polished corporate look. I sat across from him in a worn vinyl booth and pulled a photograph from my bag. In it, Brenda was holding the baby, standing proudly alongside the entire Robinson family at the hospital. He glanced at the picture but showed little reaction, just a flicker of old hurt in his eyes. "We've already broken up," he said, his voice flat. "This has nothing to do with me." I let out a sigh. "Are you sure about that?" I pushed the photo closer to him. "If we go by the timeline, Brenda got pregnant around August of last year. Are you absolutely certain you had already broken up by then? Or to put it more bluntly, are you sure you didn't sleep together after that?" His brows furrowed as he stared at the picture, really looking at the baby for the first time. He sifted through his memories, his expression changing. Then, realization dawned on him. "Wait, are you saying this child might be mine?" I gave him a firm nod. He stared at me, stunned, before his gaze fell back to the photograph. He sat frozen for a long time, his fingers tightening around the edges of the picture, tracing the outline of the baby's face. Suddenly, as if something clicked in his mind, he pulled out his phone. He scrolled quickly through his screen before handing it to me. It was a long list of hotel booking records from a cheap motel near his work site. Most of them were from the summer of last year, between July and September. "She said she was on business trips for her boss," he mumbled, more to himself than to me. "But she'd always come see me afterwards. Said she missed me." The dates aligned almost perfectly with the periods when Walter and Brenda had supposedly been on their business trips. I took screenshots of every page. Then, turning back to Russell, I laid out my final card. I leaned forward, my voice low and certain. "That boy is yours, Russell. 100%. The man in this picture, he used to be my husband. But he has fertility issues. It's impossible for him to have gotten Brenda pregnant." The moment my words landed, bang. Russell slammed his fist on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. The quiet, mild-mannered man before me was gone, his face twisted with a primal rage. "She told me she had an abortion," he growled, the fury in his voice unmistakable. "She told me it was mine and she got rid of it." Without hesitation, I handed him a piece of paper with 2 addresses, Brenda's postpartum care center and Walter's company headquarters. He gripped the paper so tightly his knuckles turned white. Before storming off, he managed to turn back and thank me. After all, if I hadn't revealed the truth, he might have never known he had a biological son, one that Brenda had been using as her golden ticket to a life of wealth. My part was done. Now, all I had to do was sit back and watch the fireworks. The next time I heard about Brenda and Walter, it was from the local trending news. The story was everywhere. I clicked on the report, and there he was. Russell, standing in front of Walter's gleaming corporate headquarters, holding up a massive, hand-painted banner. The words were bold, angry, and impossible to miss. "Company CEO Walter Robinson and my ex-girlfriend Brenda, return my son to me." I couldn't hold back my laughter. It was more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. The comment section was a goldmine of public outrage and speculation. Over 1,000 comments had already flooded in. "Just get a paternity test." Honestly though, that kid looks nothing like the CEO. He's way too dark-skinned. Looks more like the guy with the sign. And then, one comment made my fingers freeze. "This CEO looks so familiar. Why do I feel like I've seen him at a urology clinic? The one that specializes in male infertility." If that was true, then Walter had known from the very start that his fertility was an issue. He had lied to me for years. The public uproar gained momentum, and overnight, the company's stock price plummeted. I looked at the substantial sum of money in my bank account and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why I waited until after the divorce. A day later, Joyce came to my apartment with a bottle of wine, her eyes wide with excitement. "You are not going to believe this," she said, pouring us both a glass. "Did you hear? The child really isn't Walter's." The drama caused such a stir that dozens of people, even news reporters, went to that maternity center just to watch the chaos. Walter was furious, insisting on having the paternity test done right then and there, trying to prove Russell was a liar. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video from a gossip group chat. It showed Brenda, disheveled and wearing a hospital gown, kneeling and grabbing Walter's sleeve, begging him not to do the test in front of everyone. He kicked her away, his face purple with rage, his eyes bloodshot, screaming the foulest language at her. Walter's parents just stood by silently, wiping away tears, their dream of a perfect heir turning into a public nightmare. A few minutes later, Brenda, completely cornered, suddenly rushed toward the window, trying to jump from the 8th floor before onlookers and security guards stopped her. But she kept shouting, "You useless man. No wonder you and Carol couldn't have a child after 5 years. You blame me for cheating, but you're the one who's broken. Pathetic. Which woman would ever have a child with you?" Joyce then showed me another video. It was Walter, receiving the paternity test results a few hours later. He held the report, his face darkening into a mask of pure fury as he read the words, "Probability of paternity, 0%. He then tore the report to shreds, and with a guttural roar, punched the wall of the hospital, his hand coming away bloody and broken. Meanwhile, Brenda sat nearby on the bed, looking like a woman in her 40s, her eyes vacant, her skin dull, completely indifferent to the chaos she had created. Her dreams of entering high society were shattered. And now, the whole city was mocking her. And him. Double trouble. It was, as Joyce said, hilarious. In just a few months, I had gone from being the one betrayed and discarded to holding the majority of the Robinson family's assets. And I had finally gotten rid of a husband who was nothing but a useless, infertile, lying man. By the time Joyce and I returned from our celebratory trip to Europe, the city had entered a new spring. Those wild, wonderful days abroad, laughing in cafes in Paris, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean, had finally allowed me to unwind, to release the tension I had been carrying for so long. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. So much had happened in the 5 months while we were away. Walter, caught up in his affair and the paternity scandal, was fired from his job. The board of directors cited a morals clause in his contract. He had mishandled personal matters and brought disrepute to the corporation. The scandal destroyed his career, the industry blacklisted him completely. No one would touch him. In his fury and humiliation, he directed all his anger at Brenda. Neighbors reported seeing her battered and bruised, and the sounds of domestic violence echoed from their small, rented apartment late into the night. During our trip, I had received one call from Walter's mother. Her voice was trembling, full of tears, as she pleaded for help, asking if I could send money. She told me Walter couldn't handle the blow and had been drinking himself into a stupor. He'd been diagnosed with a difficult-to-treat illness related to stress and alcohol abuse. Brenda, too, had suffered a complete mental breakdown after the public humiliation and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The Robinson family, having lost their son's high salary and their reputation, had been drained dry and couldn't afford their mounting medical bills. I listened to her cries, her desperate pleas about how I was always such a good daughter to her. But I felt nothing. No sympathy. No pity. Just a strange, quiet satisfaction. Their fate was what they deserved. I gave a few short, non-committal answers and ended the call. I blocked her number right after. I would only focus on myself now. In the following days, I turned my attention back to my work, pouring my newfound energy into my passion. I was designing my new quarterly collection, a starry-themed ring for single women. When I was married, my designs focused on wedding bands, on the idea of two becoming one. But now, my focus had shifted. I wanted to create something for the women who, like me, had found their strength in being one, whole, complete person on their own. I wanted to encourage other women facing difficulties in marriage or relationships to be brave, to embrace their independence. During a design meeting, one of my younger colleagues questioned the theme. Why stars, Carol? Stars always accompany the moon. It doesn't seem to reflect female independence and self-sufficiency. I smiled, remembering the sky full of brilliant, glittering stars I had seen from a quiet hilltop in Tuscany. Actually, I said, my voice steady and confident, most stars are independent celestial bodies, shining with their own light. They generate their own energy, their own brilliance. They don't rely on the moon to exist. Just like us. We are independent individuals. We don't need to rely on anyone or any relationship to define our existence or our worth. The room fell silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the women around the table started to nod, a new understanding in their eyes. This ring isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol for every woman who has walked away from a relationship that didn't serve her. For every woman who has chosen herself over societal expectations. This ring will be a reminder that she is enough, all on her own. As I walked out of that meeting room, I felt a sense of accomplishment I had never felt before. It wasn't just about designs anymore. It was about creating something meaningful. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly on the right path. I had started this journey unsure of my future, but now, with each step I took, I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be. Strong, independent, and unapologetically myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest design of all. Thank you for watching, and for listening to my story. If you've ever been through something similar, please know you are not alone, and your light is your own. Take care of yourselves. You deserve to shine.